Welcome to Peak, a growth sport production that explores the power of culture on organizational performance. Music by The Edge. For show notes and more information, visit our website at growth-sport.com. Now here are your hosts, Mary Claire and Dr. Brian.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Mary Claire, and welcome to Peak, the official Growth Sport podcast. I have a question for everybody today. In fact, two. Is your team actually improving, or are they just staying busy? And if you're honest, or we're honest with ourselves, any leaders out there, does your team know what it should be actually getting better at right now? In today's episode with Dr. Brian, welcome back.
Thank you.
We're going to break down what continuous improvement actually looks like inside a high-performing or peak-performing organization. We'll talk about what is continuous improvement, how to build it in your team, and the results that you can expect. And then, as always, we'll connect it back to our sport model to, again, help individuals understand, how do I get this outcome? So, Brian, you ready to dive in?
Yes, let's do it.
All right. Okay, so let's just start with the basics. In your experience, Brian, working with dozens, actually hundreds of organizations, how would you define continuous improvement in a very simple way for our leaders out there?
Well, it is what it sounds like. It is continuously improving. And this is a concept that's been around for quite some time. I mean, it was really made famous by Japanese manufacturing techniques and technologies, which was constantly focused on how do we improve our output, our quality, and what we're doing. It wasn't something that was done all at once. It was something that was done incrementally. And this is that idea of marginal gains, this idea that I can squeeze out a little bit more here and a little bit more there. This was made famous by Sir David Brailsford and the UK cycling team. But this whole idea that I'm constantly looking for that next advantage, that next squeezing, that next little bit of improvement out of what we do. And you can see that would be true for us individually. It'd be true for teams. It'd be true for entire organizations. But this idea that we're constantly improving.
I actually think you brought up a really good point that I'm going to say broadly speaking, this is an opportunity to make the perfect the enemy of the good. And when we think of innovation, we think of these big things, these like monumental, the internet, for example, like something that's going to change the world.
Right.
When I don't believe that's what actually innovation necessarily has to be, or is, it can be, or how you even get it. It's like these big aha moments, or these big things that happened all at once. And this idea, I think continuous is important in this continuous improvement. We actually have to try a lot of new things before we ever get innovation, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, talk to me about the cycle, so to speak, that we should and could run through to eventually get to innovation.
Well, I love the point that you're making. I love the point that you're making about whether this is discontinuous innovation or kind of incremental innovation. And I'll just throw something out that most of the time we don't know ex ante whether what we're going to do will be discontinuous or will it be just marginally gains at the margin. In fact, a lot of times we think it'll be discontinuous and it's not. And sometimes we think it'll just be marginal and it's not. It turns out to be discontinuous. So because of that, we constantly, to your point, have to be trying new things. That requires a feedback process loop where we can try something, we can evaluate its impact, we can tweak or modify it and redo it or abandon it. And then we can do something different as we go forward or double down on what works. But you can see that we have to have that iterative process. It has to be attempted. It's got to go on long enough that it can have an impact. It has to be measured, it has to be evaluated, it has to be altered or adjusted if necessary, and then continue. So there's got to be some process where we can identify what's working, what's not working, and double down or abandon.
And I think key to that, to getting this continued improvement, if I'm hearing you correctly and kind of knowing how you think, if you are trying new things, you're also measuring, you need to measure the results of that. You need some sort of measurement to understand, is this or is this not working?
That's right. And that process, again, we come back to process, which is so important, but that process of trying things and evaluating things, understanding what's working, what's not working, trying new things, that has to be systematized. It has to be done in a way that's not just random. Otherwise, we don't really know what's working or why it's working.
Yeah. So, Brian, am I hearing that process is important to this?
I know we've never said that before, but it really is.
Okay. So I'm going to pull us back to the start because we're going to jump in. How do we get it? What are the results? And one of the results that we'll talk about is innovation. But again, in a few words for our listeners, how would you define continuous improvement?
I define continuous improvement as the innovation process. And so what that means is I've identified a problem. Now I'm going to apply a solution to that problem. And I'm going to look for ways to improve. So at any place that there is friction or any place that there is something that is causing us not to perform at the highest level. Now, this can be a little bit dangerous too, because sometimes I might say, well, it's all good. I can't see really any place to fix. But this is where the Japanese had given us such a great example of these Japanese manufacturers of how to think about this, which is there is always a bottleneck. And if I always focus on the bottleneck and look at ways to open that bottleneck, it will lead to a different bottleneck. And then I go to that bottleneck. Okay. How do I solve that bottleneck? And then once I solve that, it leads to a new bottleneck. And if I'm constantly looking at where the point of friction is the highest, then I can think about what might need to be done to resolve that. Now I can try different things. Sometimes I'll know exactly what to do. Sometimes I won't. If I don't know exactly what to do, I have to try things. And when I try things, I have to measure them. Now, I will say this also. I've had experiences where we've thought we've known what the right thing to do is, and we try to solve it that way, and we learn that that's not the right thing to do because we measured it. But for a long time, we had been doing it even though it wasn't the right thing because we thought it was. But once we measured it, we learned that it wasn't the right thing to do. So sometimes we have assumptions we're making as well.
Okay, so we know what it is, and as a leader, I know how to find it, because I think that's the other thing we see. You get caught up in the whirlwind of just continuing to move and do things, right? That we
right.
talk about. And it feels like we're moving simply because we're doing the thing or doing the things, but that doesn't mean we're actually improving. So what happens if you're stuck in that cycle and you don't take a stop and say, wait a second, where's their opportunity to improve? What happens to those teams or those organizations typically?
Well, typically they'll stagnate. What will happen is you'll kind of get to where your top level is organically. So you'll get to what you can do without really thinking hard and thinking intentionally about how to improve. And that will lead you on a plateau. In fact, here's a great test for you. If you just say to yourself, does my organization feel like it has plateaued on its productivity, on its quality, on its growth? Oftentimes it's because you're not taking a hard look at how to continuously improve it. Sometimes at the margins, but sometimes just continuously. Again, we don't necessarily know before we get started what that's going to look like. Yeah. So ask yourself, does it feel like we've stagnated? Because that's a great indicator that we are not focused enough on how to improve the organization.
And one would think if we would assume, and this is where we often intersect with organizations, they're on some sort of a decline. At some point you'll stagnate and plateau, but eventually there's going to be a decline.
That's right.
One way or the other. Okay.
Even if the decline is just relative, even if you've stayed level, but your competition's been growing, you're still declining.
That's a really good point. Okay. So we've helped folks understand what continuous improvement is, how to identify where to get it. And now what do I do about it, Brian? How do I get continuous improvement once I've identified that bottleneck, so to speak, or that point of friction?
Yeah. So it's interesting because, you can think about this at the personal level, the team level, and at the organizational level. Oftentimes, if you identify those bottlenecks, you can see those at the institutional or the organizational level. But a lot of times, the other way to identify this is if you take what your best performers are doing, either teams or individuals, and you say, now, how are they winning? And then how does that apply to the other people who are not performing at the same level? So let's do this at the team level first. You might say, I've got a great sales team and I have an average sales team. Well, what is the great sales team doing that the average sales team is not? Then you can take those practices and bring them to the average sales team and have them implement. Now, in some cases, they may not know what to do. And this might push all the way to the individual performers as well, because it might be that the team is a combination of a lot of things that all of those team members are doing. But in that case, then it's I've got to role play and I've got to practice. And I know that those are weird words in a lot of organizations. I mean, in sports teams, it's not weird at all. We talk about practice all the time. But in most organizations, we don't talk about practice. Like, we don't show up a Monday morning and have the leader say, all right, what's our practice schedule look like this week? Or, what is our, what does it look like if we role play these skills? And the whole point is to try to bring everybody up to the level of the highest performer.
I'm giggling because I just realized, as a person who was once somewhat of an athlete, and you yourself as well, like, I would I'll practice, but if somebody told me to role play, I'm like, well, that makes me feel awkward.
Yeah, right.
So I'm just thinking, actually, this word practice, the mentality of it may be easier for folks to grab onto than role play, for the very simple fact you just said it. Sports teams, that's what they do. Think of what percentage of their time is just built improving, continuous improvement, strength conditioning, and practicing, continuously improving as a team.
One point on this: practice requires vulnerability.
Yeah.
If you think about it, if I'm going to go out and work on my craft, I'm going to expose my level of performance to everybody else who's watching. Let's just take an example. If I'm on the football field and I'm a receiver and I'm going to practice my route tree, everyone's going to see how well I run it. They're going to see where I don't run it well. They're going to see where I do run it well. They're going to see the passes I drop, the passes I catch. I'm exposed. So everyone's going to know exactly what level of skill and competence I possess in the practice session. This is why we hate role play, is because if I sit down with you and role play, it's going to become obvious how well I do the job. So I have to be willing to, I have to be trusting of you that I'm going to give myself out there and be like, this is my best effort at the close. And then I'm going to open myself for feedback, because you might say, wow, Brian, that's not very good. You need to work on this, this, and this. Or you do this well, but not this well. Those are hard things to hear for my ego. And if I have an environment where I get punished for, my inabilities, or I'm afraid that it makes me vulnerable or susceptible to changes that aren't in my best interest, I'll cover it up. I'll try not to practice.
Yeah. The best experiences I've had from leaders I've worked for is when they initiated. I practiced with them. We practiced the close. We practiced, and with the coaches too. It isn't comfortable, but once you get over the first hurdle, it's awesome, because you feel that much more prepared for whatever it is you're about to go into. But yeah, it's like taking off the old self and putting on the new self. That's tough, transitioning, but the benefits far outweigh the pain. And just like any habit, when you first start a habit, it's painful.
Yeah,
but
that's
the
right.
easier you can make doing that habit, and the more that you can incentivize to do that habit, it's the benefits outweigh the pain, which is usually the case in life.
That's right. And leader to team member is an easier place to start than team member to team member, because I expect that my leader knows this better than I do, and I'm willing to take, instruction from my leader. But you'll know you've really arrived when two colleagues at the same level can get together and share best practices and be vulnerable and open to say, wow, I noticed, Mary Claire, that you really know how to do this well. I'd like to learn from you. And at the same time, you can say, wow, Brian, I noticed that you know how to do this really well. I'd like to learn from you. And you have structured time to exchange those skills and build each other. That's when you really know you've arrived as an organization.
I think that's particularly for anybody or any teams that are engaging with the customer. That one thing we did at one particular organization, we had our normal sales, like, how's the pipeline? Let's problem solve. And then after that, we immediately went into role playing. And it's just part of the rhythm. And we removed the friction of scheduling a new meeting or whatever it may be. But that's how, as a team collective, we were able to transfer. And I realized that so-and-so was better at a close, or so-and-so was better at an opening. So anyway, we built it into the culture and the natural rhythm that we were already engaged in our weekly sales call.
That's a great way to do it. Absolutely.
Okay. I think my last point there was that making it systematic removes the friction of doing it. So that's kind of at the team level. It impacts the individual performance level. At the org level, how would you think about continuous improvement, Brian?
you're trying to tie behaviors to outcomes, which is really the focus of everything that we do. Take your strategic intent and translate that into daily execution. And again, this process of looking at the things that we're doing and the outcomes that we're getting, where those are not happening, and how we would then take steps to improve that. I think this is an amalgamation of all of the teams as they work their way up through the organization. So this is something that the leader, this really starts at the leader. The leader has to look and say, okay, where are we going to focus this improvement? How are we going to put goals around those? So those are the gaps to close, which really helps us to identify those steps, those places where we are stuck or where we've plateaued, and how do we get off of those and move forward and progress through the organization. And then that can drive all the way down through the teams and then to the individual.
What I'm actually hearing you say, and I'm putting it in sport terms here, but like the whole process of gaining, the S in sport of getting strategically aligned, that's like taking the step back, what we talked about earlier, and deciding, where am I seeing friction, or where am I seeing a gap? And where am I going to place my bet that if we close that gap, that's going to drive the improvement? So as a leader, again, the strategic alignment, we understand where there are gaps to close. We put goals around those measurables. And then that weekly rhythm process of KPAs, key performance activities, would be like the part of the practice or part of the, here's what I think I'm going to do to improve this week as a team or as an organization. Is that, I took it deeper, but.
No, I appreciate that, because the practice drives it all the way to the individual. For most of us, unless we really make the effort to understand where our gaps are, we don't know what they are. We're unaware. We're unaware of ourselves and our own gaps. And so if I asked you what my gaps are, you could tell me. But if I ask me what my gaps are, I have a hard time telling myself, because I'm unaware. And I don't know my gap, and therefore I don't prioritize improving it because I don't know what to improve. Now, I can change that. I can take a very intentional approach and be honest with myself about where I do perform well and don't perform well, and look for outside advice or guidance. And this is where that 360 review has been very effective, because people will say, okay, give me feedback on what it is I'm doing well or not doing well. And as a leader, if you've done these, you know that sometimes it can be surprising. Sometimes you can give feedback and you say to yourself, wow, that was a blind spot. I didn't realize that was a weakness.
Yeah.
And you can even maybe be offended a little by it. They're often not easy to hear. But those are the kinds of things where if I'm on a quest to improve, I'm looking for those things. I want to find them. I want to hear about them so that I can address them.
You have to be in the mental space, so to speak, to even take that first step or make that first step. Right. Sometimes that's based on pain. Again, we often are engaging with clients or organizations that are in some level of pain. Okay. Anything else when you think about the org, this continuous improvement, how to get it at the org level, the team level, the individual level? Things I've heard is you have to recognize that there's an opportunity to improve. There's a point of friction. There's a bottleneck. There's a gap to close. We have to make a decision on that's the thing that we're going to close, the gap that we're going to close. Then we put process around figuring out how it is to close that, whether that's at individual level, the org level, the team level, with KPAs or the practice, opportunities to practice. Anything else you'd add in terms of, Brian, how to get continuous improvement and create a culture?
I love that summary. I think you just summarized that really well. And you can see how it takes real focus to identify those gaps and what it is you want to do to close those. And I also really would stress the point you made earlier that these are bets. We don't know the outcome, before we start. We need to try some of these things to see if they are the right thing, if they really do move the right needle and have the right outcomes that we desire. And if they aren't, that's fine. Let's stop doing that and do something else. If they are, let's double down on those. But I like the way you summarize that.
And I think the other thing I'd add is that's coming to life for me, potentially in a different way, is continuous improvement at an org level is a mindset. And it's a part of the culture, and it could be a value if people wanted to go that far. And it's obviously we're doing this because we're naming these kind of key tenets of peak performance organizations, but those peak performance organizations have a habit and have a mentality of continuous improvement and have a process by which to continue to gain it.
That's right.
So if I'm on this journey of continuous improvement, what are the results that an organization or a team or even an individual experiences when they embrace this mindset, implement a process to get it?
Well, first, you get this whole idea of competitive advantage and differentiation. We think about that at the org level, but it's really also true at the team level and the individual level.
Yeah, it's true.
So certainly at the org level, this innovation process and this continuous improvement process is the differentiation competitive advantage process. It's how you get better than your competitors. I know I've told this story several times, but I was with an org that we were trying to really be the very best that we could be. We identified some friction points, and we thought that we could improve on those. And the first thing we tried was what was standard operating procedure for all of our competitors. It was the thing that everybody thought worked. And we really measured it, and we found that it didn't work. It wasn't the thing that really drove the outcomes, which left us in a place where we didn't really know what to do because we were at the cutting edge. We were at the frontier. So we tried a few things. And in the end, we ended up doing something that wasn't that monumental. In fact, I think we would have thought it would have resulted in incremental change, but it actually resulted in huge discontinuous change. And I'll just give you an insight. We're doing intellectual property management in a university setting. And in the past, everyone had always brought the faculty members to the innovation room group. And we flipped that on its head and we went out to them. It seems like such a small thing, but it changed the game dramatically. It changed everything from the quality of disclosures we got to the interaction and engagement we got to the number of companies we could form. And it just had a discontinuous, large improvement result. But we'd have never gotten there had we not measured what everybody thought to do to begin with. And then once we determined what the right thing was, we doubled down on that, and it led to real competitive advantage. And so that's the first outcome. It's going to really differentiate and give you that competitive advantage you're looking for.
The other thing that's striking me is what's required in all of this is being willing to make decisions. Just that basic practice.
Yeah.
But it's funny how we can avoid decision making or continue to just do the things we've been doing.
Inertia is easy.
Is a decision in and of itself. But
That's right. That's the easy path. There's no question about it. The outcome here becomes really interesting because as an organization, you change the very nature of the organization. It becomes more adaptive. It becomes more responsive. It becomes more innovative.
Yeah.
The impetus that comes into the organization gets acted on. It becomes an organization that acts and doesn't just get acted on. So it moves the locus of control from external events to internal events, exogenous to endogenous, so that when we say, oh, I didn't succeed because, the U.S. bombed Iran, that becomes less of an issue. We have more control over what we do and how we do it. Yes, those might be factors, but how we respond to those factors, we have much more control. We're much more nimble. We can move much more quickly.
I think, and I don't mean to belabor this, we can move on, but I think we're both wearing glasses, and I think about, it's like if we really clean those glasses off and get a new look on life, you're going to see more because this habit of continuous improvement and this mentality of continuous improvement, you're going to see opportunities to improve that you wouldn't have noticed before because that habit wasn't there. That mindset
That's a great
wasn't there.
point.
And
That's a
that
great
you
point.
didn't have a process to do it. That is
Great
such
points.
an inhibitor.
Yeah.
So that analogy of like, I'm going to clean off my glasses, see the world in a new way, and more things are going to happen. You're going to get sharper, you're going to get faster, and that's going to happen on a more continuous and ongoing basis. So,
Right.
Okay. Brian, the sport model. We kind of touched on this already, and I think we try not to push the model too much, but the more we reflect on these topics, the more come to life is the sport model, the analogy,
Right.
Acronym that we use. So I want to bring it to life for folks that either considering it or have read the book or know the model, just to continue to put puzzle pieces together and connect dots. So from your perspective, how does continuous improvement, how do you link it back to the sport model?
And this is where we talked earlier about really getting a structured framework within which to put this innovation, continuous improvement process. So we start with S, strategic alignment. You have to identify the gaps. And identifying the gaps is a skill. As you just mentioned, identifying where the friction points are and what you need to work on, that's a real skill. It takes practice, it takes time, and your ability builds over time.
Our clients get better at it over time.
They get better and better. Yeah. Once you've identified what those gaps are, then you can put, the P and the T, the personnel performance as well as the team strength around those to improve capabilities. And I think at the heart of this comes back to results accountability. Again, you're going to continually iterate this process. How are we doing? Is it working? Are we doing what we said we would do? And is it resulting in the things that we thought that it would result in? And then we start over again and reload back at the gaps.
And those, when we're a year, in our second year or third year in with organizations, their ability to identify the gap and the level of conversation in a leadership meeting on what the gap is and what to do about it, it's just deeper. It is so cool to see it's an elevated or a deeper conversation because they've got the rhythm, they've got the mode, they have that mindset now, and they're continually reaching a higher level of peak performance as an organization. So
I love that point. It's a great point.
It's fun. It's fun to look back on or think back on and see it in real time. So. Well, very good. Any final points, Brian, that we want to surface here on continuous improvement?
I would just say that continuous improvement is not optional. It's not should I continuously improve or not continuously improve. You could even say this better as should I thrive or should I die?
Yeah.
Because continuous improvement and innovation is at the heart of an ongoing competitive organization. And I don't care whether you're for profit or not for profit. It's the same thing. You've got to thrive in what you do. It requires a constant focus on getting better. So you're either getting better or you're falling behind, because stagnant, staying the same is relatively falling behind.
Yeah, well said. Amen. Thanks for all of our listeners for joining, Brian. Another fun conversation. I know we'll jump back next week, continue to break down kind of the different elements of a peak performance organization. Folks, hope you enjoyed this conversation on continuous improvement, what it is, how to get it, and what results look like once you've implemented it. Brian and I are always happy to chat with folks. You can find us at www.growth-sport.com. Find us in our LinkedIn profiles. Happy to chat on this topic or others related to how to drive peak performance in your organization. So if you like this conversation and others, you can find us on Spotify. Please feel free to share with friends and colleagues who also care about peak performance. Until next time, we hope your drive towards peak performance is successful. Talk to you soon.
You've been listening to Peak, a Growth Sport production.